Wonderful. I'm really excited about today because we haven't done one-on-one fireside chats in quite a long time. And it's definitely an event format I would love to have more because I think it gives us a little bit more space to connect with our speaker, who is Hamilton today. So welcome. I would love to give you a few minutes to give us a quick introduction about yourself so everybody tuning in knows who they're watching today.
Sure. Well, good to see everyone. Lots of wonderful, familiar faces and names. I feel very welcomed. My name is Evan Hamilton, which you hopefully know since you joined this webinar link. I've been building communities professionally for, I think, approaching 20 years now, since the old days where nobody knew at all what you were doing. Now some people know what we're doing. And worked at a bunch of startups, B2B, e-commerce, companies that you will have never heard of, and then led community at Reddit for 5 years and got to really be a part of transitioning that from kind of this out of control growth that had wonderful things and terrible things into something that could be both a wonderful place for community and commercially viable. And then, after 5 years there, moved over to HubSpot, where I've been for about 3 years. Really wanted to move back into B2B, and I've really been focusing on specifically building up our advocacy and our customer success community efforts and using community to help our massive user base of customers, especially those in kind of our lower tiers, to make sure that they can get really high quality experiences, even if they don't have a dedicated CSM. And as mentioned, over in Berkeley, California, I'm enjoying a little bit of rainy weather over here. It's like a little bit dreary in a way that I like, and so happy to be here.
Absolutely. As it is, I feel like if it's spring for you currently, if you're not on the other side of the globe, I think it's usually kind of this like rainy weather, but it makes it there's something to it. I definitely agree. And I know that you are also involved in a lot of other communities and create a lot of other valuable resources, one of which is your weekly newsletter. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about Community Managers Breakfast as well?
Yeah, I should probably have been ready to like drop that in the chat, and I'm not. But
I'm
I
going to, so don't worry.
amazing, you're on it. Yeah, so I send out a newsletter most Mondays, which contains three of the best articles, conversations, links that I've found about community across the web. I only send it if I can find things that live up to y'all, so I'm really focused on high quality. Goes out once a week. Would love to have you subscribe.
Absolutely. I'm going to share the link to Community Managers Breakfast so everybody can subscribe in the chat. And I'm also going to share Evan's LinkedIn in case you want to follow him and see what he's been up to and the content that he's sharing. It's always a great reminder to see the CMB newsletter in my inbox. It kind of is a great reminder that it is Monday, which is just always a good one. All right, well, let's dive in. As always, our chat is open. If you have any questions for Evan, please feel free to drop them in. I always try to take notes of all the questions coming in, and we'll make sure to dedicate some time at the end to go through as many as we can. So today we are going to talk about what's next for community. We have seen a lot of changes in our market in the recent years, from community. Being massively overhyped to getting a lot of investments from companies. Now the landscape is shifting a little bit again. I think where we're seeing the most changes is the way we work as community builders and in the roles that we represent within organizations, which is something I'm really excited to chat with you about today. So to start us off, from your perspective, what did the community industry, our community landscape look like in the last few years? How would you describe it in your words?
Yeah. I rarely get to talk about my hometown, but I think it's relevant here. I grew up in this tiny former gold mining town in Northern California, and it reminds me a lot of community right now. In that, I think uh, the community space was undervalued before, and then the pandemic hit, and everyone said, "Oh my God, connection, community, we
Mm-hmm.
got to bring people together." And there was this huge gold rush, and a bunch of gold diggers showed up. And maybe some of them were thoughtful, a lot of them weren't. A lot of them were there just to extract as much as they could and left a lot of destruction in their wake. And so where I grew up, there were a lot of environmental issues left over from the gold rush in California. You know, there were mine cave-ins. People didn't know there was a mine under their backyard, and all of a sudden their backyard would fall in. So there's a lot of kind of destruction and abandonment. But there was also infrastructure that was built, right? When people came in to mine these areas, they built roads and they built towns and they built all these things. And, you know, these towns were able to bounce back and turn into not, you know, huge exploding gold rush towns, but sustainable, you know, lovely little towns. And you know, it's beautiful. And if you ever get a chance, go up to the Grass Valley, Nevada City area. It's very, very pretty and cute. I think that's where we are. I think community was undervalued before the pandemic. We all would talk about it, and, oh, yeah, like it can provide so much value. And I don't think companies saw it, and I don't think they fully understood it. And then I think it got overvalued. And now I actually think we're kind of correctly valued. And we're having to clean up the mess, right? Unfortunately, a lot of people got laid off. You know, a lot of budgets got slashed after kind of the hangover of this. But what I see now is the companies investing are actually doing it with a purpose. They see community can help me achieve X, Y, or Z, and I'm going to deploy it against that. And that's where we want to be. I actually explicitly never took any jobs if people didn't know why they wanted community.
Hmm.
Even if they said, like, we're going to give you a huge budget and tons of things, I'd say, why do you want community? What is it going to achieve for your org? And unfortunately, during the pandemic, a lot of companies didn't know the answer aside from we're hopping on the train.
Hmm.
The companies that are investing in community now really seem to know what they want to accomplish. They're investing, but investing kind of in a steady state. Let's give some money. Let's see how it goes. Let's give some more money. And so I think we're going to be able to build on these foundations and really build a sustainable community industry. And so even though the kind of hangover of the gold rush, I think feels a little bad because it felt really exciting when, you know, we were in demand and there were just so many jobs and so much investment. I do think we're in many ways at a better place than we were pre-pandemic. And I think we can use all of the foundation that was built during that time to build kind of the next generation of community.
Hmm. Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful way to describe the current state where we are. And I actually could not agree with you more. I think that organizations that are investing in community now are doing it mindfully and have a strategy behind it and know why they're doing it. I think that's the most important thing. And I feel like that at the time that you mentioned when we had this gold rush, a lot of folks got into the industry, right? We see there's more. I think that's kind of what I've seen from being in the market a little less time than you have, obviously, but I think like for the last 7 years, I think that like 2020, 21 was when I've seen most folks, like really all of the content, community one-on-one, how to get your first community manager job, right? Those were like the top hits. And I think that that might be the times that are now might be discouraging for folks, right? Because if you had a different career before, or again, didn't understand the intention, then that could be a little complicated. And something I wanted to share that actually is from the bespoke newsletter that you share almost every week. And something you wrote was that, and I'm going to quote here, was that you felt mixed feelings in trying to go where community goes from here. That you do think we've made a lot of progress in getting companies to understand the value of community, and even though we're in the hangover after the huge investment in communities during the pandemic, you can confidently say that you see consistent investment in community from big organizations. And my question is kind of where do we go from here, right? What do you think is kind of as an opener to our conversation? We've kind of recapped what you saw in the last few years, and what do you think is going to happen in this upcoming year?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'll probably say 5 times today and have said a million times in my career, and you'll all be tired of it, is we have to align with business goals. And I think that is the huge opportunity. And again, I see companies finally understanding that. When I talk about community within HubSpot, I talk about it being an amplifier. We
Mhm.
actually previously were part of a group called Community-Led Growth. And sorry, Lori, if you're listening, but I hated that name because to me, first of all, it heaped too much potential in community, that community was going to replace product-led growth, which they're just apples and oranges. They're not the same thing. It also suggested like community is the tip of the spear, and I don't think that's true. I think community is something that can plug into any customer facing effort,
Mhm.
any human facing effort really, and make it better, right? Human connection drives us. It's powerful. Insights from other people are powerful. And so I'm really trying to talk about where do we plug in community to make the things we're doing more effective rather than replace them. And I think that's going to be kind of the drum we have to beat is, hey, I can help you be more successful. And people love to hear that. And when I did my, initial tour at HubSpot, I went around and talked to everyone and said, okay, what are your needs? What are your challenges? What are your problems? And I came back and said, here's how I think we can help with those. And that really resonated. And I was almost surprised. They were like, wow, nobody's ever done that before. They've just said community is the future. Like, just prioritize community. But that alignment with what other people are doing and how you can help them, I think is core to community. And it means we can affect all parts of the organization instead of just kind of sit off in a corner.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And it looks like there is some, I think, optimistic future ahead of us if we apply what you're saying, and if we kind of go into building our next program, our next meetings, our next conversations with that intention. I think that we can, even though that we might have some mixed feelings now, I think we can have a positive outlook on things. But let's dive into the community manager's role overall, because I think that's where we've seen the biggest changes. And it's also something that you mentioned in your newsletter, which sort of sparked us having this conversation today. So I'm really interested in your take on this. How has the role of a community manager changed over the past 5 years? What have you seen? Because I think that, from not being intentional to being very intentional to working in specific areas to being in person to then online, I think there's been so much that happened. What have you seen before we dive into what's coming next?
Yeah. So I think what underpins all of this is kind of the shift in the web. Web 1.0 or the original web, there was novelty just in talking to other humans that were not near you. And those of us who were around for that, yeah, it was just like, oh my God, I'm talking to this person on the internet. Wow, this is amazing. Those of you who are younger, I know you're used to it. And that doesn't seem novel at all, but it was. Web 2.0 was, oh, I can find people who maybe have some shared interests, and that started to be really powerful. Oh, wait, I can go find a subreddit on this, niche anime that I'm into, or, find a community on crocheting and join that and meet my people. And I think a lot of us came up during that era where a lot of our job was just bringing people together and, one of my more successful programs in my early career was the physical version of Community Manager Breakfast. We had Community Manager Breakfast, Customer Service Breakfast. I think at least one person on this call went to one of those. And it really was just bringing people together. And people were like, oh my God, there's other people like me. I can talk about what I'm doing. I can understand if I'm, doing this right. And I don't think that's true anymore. I think we are at the ubiquitous internet stage where so many people not only have access to the internet, but know that there are
Mhm.
communities out there for them. The algorithms deliver them people and content that is relevant to them. And so just bringing similar people together in a room isn't a novelty anymore. And so I think the shift for us is from gathering people to connecting people and really thinking about how do we make those connections high quality. It's not just putting people in a room, it's then facilitating
Mhm.
how do they converse, who is connecting, who even is in the room. Maybe we need to do some curation, who is going to learn from whom, what projects can they do together. There's a reason we're seeing, such success in mentorship programs recently because that is a much more sort of focused, targeted, here is the thing we are going to do in order to help you grow via community rather than just put you in a space together. So I think
Mhm.
that's the first big change.
Mhm.
I think just to keep banging that drum till you get tired of me, I think there was a lot of community for community's sake a couple of years ago, and we have to serve business goals. And I'll be really happy the day I get to stop talking about this because I feel like my whole career has just been me doing this talk over and over, but
We're here for it.
I think sometimes we have some preciousness, like community is this thing and it's important and it has to live over here versus saying, well, community is one tool in the toolkit. And yes, it's special and we don't want to abuse our community members, but also it has to play to business goals. We have to be flexible about what it is. I am guilty at points in the past of saying, like, well, I shouldn't do that because it's not community. Like, that's not technically bringing people together to have a conversation and missed out on opportunities where I probably could have built something that was adjacent to community and achieved something for the company. So I think we have to move a little bit past kind of the preciousness of like community is this golden thing on the hill and say community is wonderful, but it's wonderful when it gets funding and it gets funding when it is integrated in the organization.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of follows on a question we had in the chat, which is it gets funding when it has that place in the organization and it has that place when there is a purpose, right? I think what you mentioned on the beginning, and we've seen that, and I think it really did not help our industry a couple years back, everybody wanting to build community just because they want it. They want to look as great, as cool. It sounds fun. I think those were like really the times where now we're kind of seeing the other side of this, right? If something is fun, then that's the purpose of it, right? There is no ROI unless you really do measure emojis as the as kind of the end result. So yeah, I could not agree with you more. And now looking into the future, what what are we learning? What are the skills that we should be adapting as community managers as we're kind of, seeing our roles change and kind of seeing the strategy change? What are the things that we should look out for? Maybe the new skills that we should adapt for, to make sure that our careers are thriving.
Yeah, I think it starts with that just understanding of the business. You don't have to be an MBA. Just take the time to read what other teams are doing in your company, to consume content outside of the community industry, right? If you're helping customer success teams, go listen to customer success podcasts. So you can just start to understand the broader ecosystem and be able to make connections and say, oh, wait, this could connect here. I think I got praise from my manager at HubSpot. We moved from the marketing team to the customer success team. And a couple months after that, our team, which is the scaled customer success team, had to do a pitch. Everyone on customer success did a pitch to leadership. And it was kind of a fun game sort of thing. Our team won, and I had a big part in that. And I say that not to toot my own horn, but because my boss was like, "Oh, you actually understand customer success." And I was kind of surprised, which probably doesn't say great things about community, but was like, "Oh, you actually get how the whole thing works." And that is a huge benefit. So just take that time to consume that content to talk to people in your org who you don't normally talk to. Go talk to a CSM. Understand like what does customer success look like? Go talk to a salesperson. Be like, what is it like when you're selling? What are the factors that play into this? Just make sure you have that broader understanding.
Mhm.
Would be remiss if I don't mention AI, of course. Check AI off your AI bingo. I think everyone needs to be familiar and comfortable with AI and thinking about how to use it for efficiency. I don't think AI replaces core parts of the community experience. I think we're actually like fairly insulated against that compared to so many roles. Knock on wood. Hopefully that will be true. But I think more it's about just how can you use it for efficiency. Right now, who knows if it'll turn out to be any good, but I'm stretching myself by using a tool called Replit to try to build a matchmaking tool and just learning about like how can I build things for myself using AI that are going to make me or my team more effective. And then lastly, I think creativity, which I think community professionals are great at. But again, going back to the ubiquitous web, we can't just say, you're all in a room, talk amongst yourselves, magic will happen. We have to get creative about what we do to make those connections special. Nikki's here who runs the community, and I loved the like happy hours that Nikki was doing. And it's just like, hey, everyone's here on whatever Thursdays at 4. And it was just this like very special thing to all be there in the same moment. And so just thinking through stuff like that, if you look at the community collective, two very similarly named things that Paz, I'm forgetting her last name, sorry, is running. They're doing really interesting things around how do they really actively connect people with folks they match with. There's a bunch of really cool small paid communities. If you check out the Beginner Maps podcast, I highly recommend it because somehow he finds really interesting people to talk to. But people talking about how they like how people go through case studies together and be each other's board and like have board meetings. I think that creativity is so much more important now. And again, I think we are really predisposed to it. I know a lot of people like myself were liberal arts majors, not business majors, or just have a creative background. And so that creativity, I think, is going to be even more important, frankly, especially as a lot of the rest of the web experience becomes very AI driven and maybe like useful, but also not very fun and creative.
And I'm glad you're mentioning that because I think the value of a community builder does not come from, how many hats they can wear, particularly in creating content, event graphics, their own tools, their own websites, right? It's a really like multiple seats and hats wearing roles in a lot of organizations, especially if you're a small team or a team of one, but it is in that human connection, right? And how can you really be the glue, not just for your customers, your potential customers, but also inside the organization to make sure that you are able to communicate with the outside world that is kind of orbiting around what you do, right? So I think when you talked about skills and using AI and other platforms, that's where we should be. That's where we should be heading. And I think you summarized that amazingly. Um, if we're looking at folks that are getting into community now, right? And I think there are still folks new to the industry, right? As in every day somebody decides to start their career in community or make a transition. Actually, the other day I had someone reach out that they want to get back into community after many years of working in a different space, in a different trajectory. What would you recommend to someone starting a career in community these days? Where should they start? What to look for, what to expect during an interview.
I mean, first, I would say, are you sure? Not because you shouldn't join community, but because I do think it's a labor of love. Like, we could probably be more successful in making more money off being a salesperson, but most community professionals I know that would not bring them joy. We do this because it brings us joy, and thankfully, we've been able to make a career of it, which is a wonderful thing. But you have to make sure you're like, okay, I'm willing to put in the work. I know this isn't going to be as kind of rote and easy a career path, but hopefully much more rewarding. So that aside, if you're like, no, I love connecting people, I want to do it. I would say first, if you haven't, try and build a community outside of work. That doesn't have to mean you're building hundreds of people in a, circle community, but like it could be an event. It could be, a group of friends that you get together to do something. Just having some sort of experience connecting people is really important. And I have a lot of folks who are interested in community, and I ask them that, and they're like, no, I haven't ever really done anything. And I'm like, did you have a run club or like a group of people who played games on Friday night? And if they don't, it's just going to be a hard path. And so if you haven't, go do that. I think part of why community came naturally to me is because I had been in the music scene, gathering people together around music. I had done made maps for a computer game and been part of that community of, gathering people around this video game. And so I just think real world experience is important. And then there's a lot of competition right now. There are people on this call right now who are incredibly talented who are looking for work. And so going in the front door is pretty hard right now if you're new to community. And so what I would recommend is finding a way to be adjacent to a community. Either, we've hired folks with Kennedy's on the call right now. Kennedy was on the support team at HubSpot and I think did some volunteering with us and reached out and we said, "Oh, awesome. Okay. We know how high quality you are. We know you're thoughtful. We want you to come over and join our team." Alternatively, oftentimes people hire from the community. And so go be a major participant in a community you're part of. I'm pretty sure, like Nikki, uh, part of your small team is people from the community. And so go participate and be part of it. And that goes back to like, hey, it's a labor of love. Like if you really, really want a job in this space, you got to show up and start contributing.
Absolutely. I think having that that drive so you don't get disappointed easily and know what you're fighting for is super important, right? Just like if you're getting into any other career, having that connection there is really important. I think knowing that if creating experiences, whether it is in person or online, if that's something that brings you joy and you want to do it for fun, for work, for a brand that you're passionate about, for a company that you believe in, I think that that can be a really, really rewarding experience. So if you go through that initial check-in, which really resonated with a lot of our listeners today, I think it's an amazing career to have. And you did mention AI a little bit. I would love to circle back to that question and ask you, how can what are some things that you see that we can do with AI that are strategic that can just help us work smarter? I think it's something that a lot of folks are talking about. I do agree with you that there are these little things that can just make your life easier. You don't have to fear for your job. What have maybe you tried, or yeah, what have you seen kind of in terms of how we can use AI just to help make our lives a little easier?
Yeah, I don't think it's been utilized very significantly yet. Chris Stetzel, who I think is on this call, probably is doing something really cool with it right now. But I think we're getting there. We're close. Part of the problem has just been connecting these AI tools to our community platforms has been annoying. Now, either some of these community platforms are integrating AI tools, or we're all starting to get our data over to where we need it to interact with AI. So I think we'll start seeing more too. But I think AI can cover kind of the dumb minutia. It can help you, just do rote tasks that you have to do at scale. I think it's going to do a lot for moderation. I forget the name of it, but there's recently a suite of, I think, open source AI powered moderation tools that was released that I'll try and dig up for y'all later. So I think it's going to cover a lot of that. I think, as mentioned, we can start to build tools for ourselves that make our lives easier. Not something that, would be publicly facing, but hey, I need, again, for me, we do some matchmaking stuff. I feel like that's something I could build a tool to do. It's not insanely complicated, but it does take steps. And so, the first draft I have is like pretty much doing the same matches I would have done by hand. And so that'll save a bunch of time. And so I think what that allows us to do is to become more strategic on one hand, to think big about our programs instead of be stuck in the mud, but also be more personal, because I know a lot of community professionals who feel like, God, I wish I had talked to my community more, but I spent all this time posting and moderating and creating
Mm-hmm.
content. And so my belief and hope is that this allows us to say, great, instead of spending a bunch of time like writing social media posts, I can plug them into a tool that, I can plug my new project into a tool that automatically generates those posts via AI. Boom, that goes out. Now I can go in and actually have calls with my members and understand what they need and support them. And that work, while it doesn't scale, pays off in the long term, as you all know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think if you're able to find those areas where you can save time or get a little bit more creative, that's amazing, right? You mentioned that you're building a matchmaking tool. Would you mind sharing the platform you're using again? I think we had someone mention it in the chat.
Yeah, it's called the Replit, and it's this coding tool where you literally talk to this bot and you say code this, and then it codes it, and then you say change this, and it changes it.
Mm-hmm.
It's what a lot of people call vibe coding. There was a
Mm-hmm.
whole Kevin Roose
Mm-hmm.
article in the New York Times about it, and a
Mm-hmm.
very fun episode of Hard Fork, the Hard Fork podcast, if you want to listen to it, where they talk about it. And the downsides to these tools are, if you don't know code, then you're totally reliant on the bot. But I've been pretty impressed. I mean, I've, spent probably a day's worth of time, and I've gotten this thing to build an interface where I can upload a CSV with people who have listed interests, and then it suggests matches, which so far the iteration I made this week kind of matches up to how I would have matched people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe better in one or two places, or better than a cursory job. And then automatically generates an email that I can click and it opens up Gmail and I can send it. Um, Very rudimentary, not something that's like good enough to sell, but I got all of that through just talking to this bot and telling it to build things for me. And so I think that, especially those sort of tools, there's other ones like that. I would really advise everyone start playing with just to see how it can make your life easier. Because to Chris's point about developers, how many of you have been in a situation where you're like, I just need this one internal tool, and your internal developer teams are like, no, we're never going to build that for you. We've got far more important things to do.
Absolutely. I think that getting engineering time is always very, very difficult, especially in if you are in community and it's not an engineering community. That's always a tough one. We actually, I believe we've used Replit at home for our little yearly gathering that we do every year. We host trivia, our little community activities here in the neighborhood. And this year was the first year where we didn't have to do it all manually. We built our own little trivia that we shared with everyone, and we could calculate points. So it's all these little things that can help you. But I think it's a bigger conversation when it comes to AI. So it's something that we can definitely get into in our community, as we always do after these events, where we have a little bit of a follow-up chat on what everyone thinks. Um, well, speaking of what's next, I mean, we talked a lot about AI, we talked about skills, starting your career in community. If we look at kind of the trends for 2025, what are the biggest kind of things to look out for, the biggest shifts in the community industry overall, not just in the role of a community manager, but in our industry overall, that you see happening in 2025 that we should be aware of?
Yeah. So I think a big one, which has been talked about plenty, is community everywhere. And I think we'll get to it later. I have some caveats and reservations there, but I do think we're seeing many more small communities. We're seeing Reddit. Reddit is bigger than ever. I take full credit for anything good with Reddit. Anything bad is not my fault. No, I'm not the reason Reddit grew, but Reddit, because Google is trying to offset the low quality of all the AI generated content on the web, they are prioritizing forum content quite significantly, and Reddit is a big part of that. Um, as well as all these AI tools are learning from Reddit. So Reddit is a really important place to be. But again, all these small communities as well, in the B2B SaaS space, there's a community called Pavilion. It's a Slack community with like 10,000 people, which on its face doesn't sound like, a huge audience, but it is the core audience for HubSpot. It is the people who are doing the things that our tool can do. And so those smaller communities, I think, also are going to be important to be a part of, whether it's you contributing, your champions, whether you're doing events with them or sponsoring them. So I think that's really important. And it's also important as a data source, right? Because if people are using AI to say, hey, how's this software? It's going to take a lot of insight from Reddit. And if there's not good conversations about your company there, you're going to be in trouble. So I think that's one.
Yeah.
And then I think what's going to happen with AI, at least for, B2B product communities, is it's going to shift community to be more of an expert's corner. I think AI is going to take the really simple, how do I reset my password stuff. I think that's okay. Like, I don't think our community members really want to be answering that. We don't really want to be answering that. I don't say this flippantly because I know folks have suffered from AI taking some of this work, but I think the opportunity is to have community be the place where people go for advice on implementation, on edge cases, on integrations. And increasingly, that's what we're seeing in the HubSpot community. It is the main venue for our free customers to get support, but actually a lot of the posts are very complex. People saying, "Hey, I'm trying to use this thing to do this really weird edge case," and it's not something we would ever put in our knowledge base, right? It's not something
Mm.
that we're ever going to have as a course in our academy because it is an edge case. It's doing something in a certain way or it's integrating. And that is where I think community can shine. And actually, I remembered to include a link. This is my favorite example. And now Trey on my team is going to hate me because this is going to get a weird traffic bump. But this community post, I think, is just a great example of something that would never be in our knowledge base. We'd never have, an Academy video on, and that makes community really special, which is also very useful for Google because if someone is like, I can't find this, they're going to Google for it, they're going to find the community. So I think we need to lean into that and really say, community is not a low quality support channel. It's actually a very high quality channel where people can get advice and see how others are doing things. We have an amazing knowledge base team. We have an amazing academy team. Our product, I believe, is great. But still, every day I hear customers say, am I using this right? Am I taking full advantage of this? What are other people doing? We
Hmm.
want to hear what other humans are doing, and we want that validation or that, oh, wow, I'm not taking full advantage of this. Gosh, I should be doing more with this. And community has a unique role to play there. And so I'm not saying it's going to be painless. I think there's definitely going to be some pain along the way, but I think we can ride the AI transformation change here actually better than support reps can. A lot of support reps, I think, are going to be out of work. Community, I think, still has a really important role to play. And especially if we can start then getting community integrated into our support surfaces. So if someone can't find what they're looking for, they're checking out community. I think that's the opportunity.
And I think our I wanted to say listeners, but also our participants today agree with you. I think that if you are, and I think we're seeing that as a trend in other organizations as well, right? Because if you are, you see that more and more. We've had a huge rise of product-led growth companies where you're using the tools on your own. You're not talking to a human. That's the whole premise. You buy a cheaper tool and you are able to be a self-starter where then there has to be a good documentation. There is a community that helps you along the way, right? And then ideally, now there can be someone that can help you automatically close off a question if the question has been already answered. And I think that's where AI has been plugging in the most. And from our conversations with other platform builders in our space, what we've seen is that that's where they're focusing most of their efforts, right? So I think if we would really love to see some magic in terms of AI helping us do our job better, giving us top trends and recommendations and right like being the secret whisper. I think we still have some time to go because we're now in that era of automating the small mundane tasks so that we can hopefully spend more time with our community and yeah, and build a space where, like you said, and we've seen in the chat as well, we have more experts than beginner questions or reset password questions, et cetera, et cetera. And you, at the beginning of your answer, you mentioned that some of the trends that we have seen is community everywhere and small communities. And I've seen a lot of talk over on LinkedIn and other spaces about micro communities, which have been trending a lot. What are you thinking about micro communities? Do you think that we're gonna see this in our corporate, sort to say, worlds as well, or do you think that micro communities are something that's more on sort of the hobby building side of things?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I don't feel like I have a super confident answer aside from yes, I think all signs point to more and more small communities, especially Gen Z is not super interested in kind of the giant social networks. They all kind of use them and hate them, and they're gravitating towards smaller spaces. So I think part of that again is us being in those spaces, whatever that means, right? Not infiltrating, but can we participate? Can we send our champions in, have them participate? Can we, co-host an event with these small spaces? I think we're going to have to be really involved in them. Um, I think in terms of companies building their own small spaces, it's hard. It's hard because companies, large companies thrive on scale. And so we tried building a lot of small communities at HubSpot, communities of practice. And we have a couple that, have done really well and I'm really proud of, but we had a lot that just they didn't reach the size that the organization kind of could even see them. Like our marketing org works at such a massive scale that we're like, look at this community. We've got 200, monthly active users. And they'd be like, I literally, I can't see what you're talking about. That's so small for us. And so yet that community needs love and care and a lot of work. So I'm not quite sure what it looks like within companies, except for perhaps I do think we'll see a lot more teams build their own communities. And I think that's another thing we need to embrace. Our partner team has a community for partners. It doesn't make sense for my team to own that because it's about partners. To run it, you really have to have expertise on partners. And so we've really focused on this idea of kind of a center of excellence where we
Mm,
are bringing together everyone who's building communities at HubSpot, making sure they're sharing what they're doing so there's not collisions, having opportunities for everyone to share advice or learn something together, and also making sure they're held to a certain standard. And nothing formal yet, but at some point, maybe to run a community at HubSpot, you have to take a course or do something like that. And so I do think we'll see more micro communities across the org, and we need to be
mhm.
supportive of that, not say, no, 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 I build community, I have to own those because I've done that before and it doesn't go super well. Just irritates people.
That's a confession to share. But I think it's is you learn from experience, right? And I think if we're able to provide the better experience for those members, if they're able to find answers faster, make connections faster, I think that makes a lot of sense. And as we're in the second half of our conversation, I do want to share a reminder to our audience today. If you have any questions for Evan, now is the time to share them in the chat. I know that there were already a few. I did note them down, but just wanted to remind everyone so that you get to ask your questions. I have, I think, my favorite question of today's conversation to ask you before we hop into audience questions. And one of my last ones for today is going to be on kind of like the biggest trends you see. And let me rephrase this. What are like the biggest trends or ideas in the community space right now that you think are overhyped?
So I talked about how a big trend is community everywhere. I also think community everywhere is overhyped. And so what I think a lot of people read into community everywhere is, oh, hosted communities are pointless. I should just go host my community on Reddit and host my community elsewhere. And Richard Millington is fantastic. I love that he, started pushing us in this direction because I do think even myself, I wasn't thinking as much about external communities as I should, but we've also had wonderful debates on this. Uh, I think there's still so much benefit to a hosted community, having the data, being able to integrate it into your experiences, not living at the whim of a platform that could suddenly change or, be bought by a Nazi or, whatever. Just random example. It's dangerous to completely hitch your community wagon somewhere else. You can do it. It's just dangerous. And so, especially in B2B at least, which I'm mostly speaking to here, I think you do have to have your own space. It's just about treating these outside communities as connections, right? And you're sending content out to them. You're hopefully bringing people back in from them to your space. You can't ignore them. But I do worry. I saw some people respond to that and just be like, yes, I can finally cancel all my software and just like go out and be on Reddit. And I just think that's a dangerous way to approach things. I think it needs to be additive rather than replacing.
hmm hmm But I think that's a great take. And I mean, we've even seen this outside of community and outside of our space, which I don't necessarily like to make this comparison. I think a lot of people do, but we have seen this even in the sort of marketing slash influencer space where there has been such a huge influx of folks now trying to like own their followers, right? Whether that's through like creating smaller platforms you can log into. We've seen Circle launch their public library of communities that are hosted on Circle, and that's exactly what that is, right? More and more folks are starting their own Substacks so they can kind of again have you as a contact, be closer to you, not lose you as a follower. And I think it's very similar to what you are describing, where as an organization you are then reliant on the other platforms, and the goal is to create an ecosystem, right? Not to create a monopoly in one, but to sort of create an ecosystem where at the end of the day you are able to connect to your community and not lose your community if something were to happen. Super interesting. All right, let's dive into some audience questions. We had quite a few, so I'm gonna start a bit at the top of our thread here. And the first question is from Kagri. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on companies shifting from building their own communities to partnering with independent communities or community businesses. Do you see that as the future?
Yeah, I think this ties into what we were just talking about. I don't
Mm,
think it's the future, but I think it's a really valid path. If you look around and you say, man, there are already really vibrant communities on this subject. So we're not talking about a product community, probably. We're talking about like community of practice. You're like, I don't have anything that can compete with this. Don't compete with it. And I see too many companies be like, well, we're going to make a better version of this. And unless you have a really unique idea, you're not. And so I think Chili Piper, is the classic example of a B2B company that didn't build their own community, but worked with a bunch of others. And yeah, I think they looked around and they said, like, think they're focusing on salespeople. Like there's already so many communities out here doing this well. And we kind of made that misstep at HubSpot, which I take full credit for, where we said, we think we can do it better. And we just couldn't. And so
mhm,
I think just knowing where you think you have a differentiator and where you don't. Now, obviously, if it's a
mhm,
community about your product, you have an advantage there. But yeah, building your own community of practice, I think you really have to feel like, okay, I have something unique to offer here and I can attract enough people that it's going to be beneficial for the business. And I'm not saying it's impossible. Plenty of people do it. And I think the biggest opportunity is when there's category creation. When a company is
mhm.
creating a whole new role and a whole new category, then, oh man, that's such an amazing opportunity, like Gainsight did, to come in and say, wow, nobody has a customer success community, really. We're going to be the ones to start that and lead that charge. So I think it's just about making sure there is an opportunity there. And again, I think during the gold rush, a lot of companies were just like, we don't care, we'll just throw money at it, and then realized how hard it was to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the question I think most folks at that time heard while interviewing was, "We want no what Notion has." I think that was kind of like the big, the big quote. And I agree with you. And I think also if you are starting a community, I think sponsoring or partnering with another community is a great way to start before so you know a bit more about what's out there before you invest that time, right, in building your own community and supporting the ecosystem, learning what it looks like, learning from folks, what are they missing. So yeah, could not agree more. Another
I'll
question we
also
have is, mhm,
I'm going
oh,
to
go for it.
interject really briefly and say, listen, Notion's community is amazing and Notion's product is super cool. I know that Notion has no way right now of measuring the value of that community. They know it's valuable, they're not going to cut it, but it's this beast. Like, it's not an organized community program, and that's no shade on anyone who worked on it. I think it grew like wildfire, and that's a wonderful thing to have, and they're definitely benefiting from it. But I don't want anyone to look at Notion and say, I'm going to build that, because I don't really think they built it. It kind of just happened. And a lot of really talented folks on their community team helped kind of try and, you know, give it some extra juice here and there and align it with things, but it is not a structured community program. And it's really, I think, a side effect of how innovative and exciting that product was. So I just anytime I hear Notion, I like have a reaction. I don't want to, again, I want to be really careful not to put any shade on that team, because I do think amazing people did amazing work there, but it wasn't like a grand strategy, and it's not like deeply integrated into their systems. It is just this amazing, runaway train.
It is very decentralized. I think it's a very I think for specifically a SaaS product, it's a very unusual community. It's not something you can definitely like blueprint. And we see a lot of our customers then going the exact opposite way, right? I think Notion still they have a bunch of communities on Facebook, right? They have a bunch of different sub communities that they don't know about. And I think that there is a lot that goes behind to just like keep track of things. So yeah, I think it's such an interesting case. All right, another question we have from Misaki, and they asked us related to the idea of community everywhere and micro communities. How can a community professionals address user fatigue from the sheer number of available communities and the amount of information within each community?
I think that goes back to a couple of things we mentioned. One is like, don't build it if you don't have, a unique angle. And the other is really think about how you are delivering value. Again, that Beginner Maps podcast, huge fan of it. A lot of the communities they talk about are for the same audiences, but they found something unique about it, right? So there's one that's like, we're focusing on higher level executives who are looking for their next job. They're obviously not, they're still in their current job. They're not going to go publish that on social. They want help really thinking about the next stage of their career. And so they get practice, interviewing and pitching. They have VCs come in, talk about what they look for in execs. They're delivering a really specific value. There's another one, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name. Hopefully, I'll remember by the end of this, which is a community for design professionals who are a team of one. So, they're the only design person at their company. And so they focus a lot on how do we provide feedback on your work, the feedback you would normally get from a boss or coworkers, but you don't have any of those folks. So I think just really narrowing in on like, what is the value this audience really needs? And not again, just saying, oh, going to put everyone in a room and they'll talk and that'll be the value, but actually, what can I uniquely provide? And again, something that AI probably can't, having that human input on your design work is, irreplaceable. Yes, you can have AI like review your resume, but actually hearing from people about like, here's what the job market's like right now, here's what, hiring managers want to hear, that can't be replicated by AI. So I think just what about community is going to be beneficial here and not it's not people being in a room, right? It's what specific connection is going to drive value. And I think when you can find that, that's when community shines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned, especially if you are smaller team or a team of one, because we do have one other question that I wanted to ask, and it kind of builds on that one a little bit. And this question is from Robin, and the question is, how do smaller teams tackle hosting their own community, contributing to community everywhere, and still try to be front of your community and not just responsive?
Good to see you, Robin. I have the answer. No, I don't have the answer. I have some suggestions, but that is a challenging thing about being a smaller team. The things I would recommend, which probably you're already thinking about, one is can you get other folks in the org involved? Again, like support folks are perfect because they know a ton about your product. They're probably looking for the next stage of their career. Most people don't want to stay in support. So they can be great folks to activate. Just finding your champions like, oh, this person mentioned our community favorably. Maybe they want to participate. And then also activating your community and really, again, in contributing to community everywhere, I think that is a perfect place to activate champions and say, okay, who in my community is on Reddit? How can I equip them to go talk about our brand? How can I point them towards a post where they might want to answer and really deploy them? Because you probably have a lot more customers than you have employees.
Hmm. Absolutely. I think that if you're able to really find those folks within your organization and give them the right tools and as easy as possible to get them started, there is a big project. I think it's the Secret Little Library, My Little Library, the public libraries all over the US. It's one of my favorite community stories because I love how they thought about onboarding new folks to starting their own little libraries in their neighborhoods and what were the starting kits and the instructions you got. And I think that's such an easy thing to do to start with to get folks on board. And you mentioned this before when you started at HubSpot. You mentioned I started with conversations with other folks, right? How can we help? And also, I think a second part of that conversation is how can they contribute, right? Showing them that it's valuable for them, for the teams, for the customers, for everyone, and taking it from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point about making it easy and specific, I think we often default to kind of broadcasting because that feels easier. Oh, I'm going to write an
Mm,
internal newsletter. There's so many internal newsletters at your company. A lot of people just aren't going to open it. And so the other day, I was talking with one of my team members about, man, there's some really interesting content in our subreddit. We should be sharing this internally. And we said, should we create a newsletter internally about it? But no, some of this is useful to sales, some is useful to customer success, some is useful to product. And
mhm,
if I'm in any one of those teams and I'm getting an email and nothing's relevant to me, I'm going to stop reading that. And so really thinking about like, if I'm trying to hook someone internally into participating, how can I deliver the most specific thing to them and be like, this could help you specifically? And community is a lot of starting with things that don't scale. I think that's also true internally. If you blast an email to the company being like, please participate in our community, they're not going to do it. But if you go to a CSM and you're like, hey, just so you know, one of your customers is like really upset in the community. You should know that before your next call. Or, hey,
Mm,
salesperson,
mhm,
this free customer over here was asking about our paid tools. Might be a great time to get on a call with them and walk them through them. That starts to get the ball rolling and they start to become your evangelists. And so, just like with community, I think start small.
Absolutely. I think that feels like magic. I'm gonna share a link to an article we wrote on our blog not so long ago about why how you can be kind of an internal PR person for your community, and there are some like tips and ideas on what are the types of content you can share, which I thought were really helpful. So I'm gonna share that with yeah, with everyone in the chat as well. And I know we're over time, so I'm gonna stop our questions here, even though we have a few more, and I wish we could continue the conversation live with you, Evan. But we do always do a quick follow-up of what's been said during our events, and then start a conversation in our community. So if you're not a member of our talk-based community yet, feel free to hop in. We'd love to see you there. I'm also gonna reshare Evan's newsletter and your LinkedIn in case folks want to subscribe or give you a follow. Thank you everyone for being here with us. And Evan, thank you for hopping on and spending this hour today with our community, sharing your hot takes, your tips, and yeah, I think your predictions on what's next in the community industry. I found it extremely helpful. We had a wonderful audience today, so thank you everyone for participating. And yeah, that's a wrap.
Thanks, y'all. You're all great. Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody. And we have a question on the recording. Yes, we always do share the recording. It's always on our YouTube. I'll send a quick follow-up email, and we do a little recap now on our blog as well with kind of the key takeaways. So lots of content to look out for. All right,
Thanks, y'all.
thank you everybody. Have a wonderful day.